Resident Evil 6 is one of the most divisive games in the franchise, a fact I was reminded of after I mentioned it in my recent Requiem prep video. If you haven't seen that video, you should go check it out after this, but here's what I said in regards to RE6. It was widely hated for a long time, but over the years has found its fans. This is the last time we see Leon, and honestly most of the main cast, for some time, as Resident Evil 6 did not review or sell well at release. And as I mentioned before, time has been kind to RE6, and I've seen a lot of people who were initially very hard on the game come around to liking what it has to offer. After that statement, I had a number of people sound off in the comments about how I was wrong and the game was a success, and Capcom just had unreasonable expectations. I also had a lot of people on the other side telling me I downplayed how bad RE6 really is and that the game has zero redeeming qualities. I personally envy these people, as they have clearly never played a truly unredeemable slop mess of a game. Games like Operation Raccoon City or Ride to Hell Retribution are just a few that come to mind. So me being new to this whole getting views and comments on my videos thing, I tried to respond to people to explain myself, which was an exhausting mistake. But after responding to the same thing over and over, I realized I basically have a video's worth of thoughts here, so I thought I'd put this together. Now, if you saw my last Resident Evil video, you'll know I like numbers and stats, so of course I'll be proving my point with numbers and math. And with that intro out of the way, I will now explain how everyone is wrong about RE6.
You're both pieces of shit. Yeah, I can prove it mathematically. Actually, let me grab my whiteboard. This has been a long time coming anyway.
The first point to address is that RE6 sold well. Now today, if you look at the Resident Evil franchise sales, RE6 is number 2 overall in total units sold to date. RE6 is only beaten out slightly by Resident Evil 5, so the top selling Resident Evil games are the two games that are widely considered by most fans to be the worst entries in the mainline numbered series, which I think proves already that unit sales don't equal success. Unless of course you're Call of Duty, then that's all that matters. But some other factors as to why these games find themselves so high in unit sales versus any of the other better games in the franchise are time, accessibility, and discounts. RE5 and RE6 have both spent almost a decade as the most modern and widely accessible RE games you could get, as they have been ported to almost every platform. So for the time between RE6 and RE7, this made them big sellers for those who wanted to get into the Resident Evil franchise for many years, as most people will jump into a series with the most recent release, only working their way back if they feel compelled to do so. Both RE5 and RE6 both saw steep discounts shortly after release, but RE6 was definitely the worst offender, dropping to $19.99 only 2 to 3 months after releasing. This new discounted price would essentially become the new overall price for RE6, as the game was regularly on sale until the sticker price was just changed to $19.99 before any discounts. I can speak to a lot of this personally, as I was working at GameStop during this time and watched it all unfold. At the store I worked at, our back room where we kept overstock of new and pre-owned games had racks dedicated just to new and used copies of RE6 and Two Worlds 2. Two of the games we just could never seem to move. I think it's also important to remember how long ago this was. To help make my point, here's a picture of me working the midnight release of Gears of War 3 at the time. Now this was 2011, the year before RE6 would actually come out. This was in the era when gaming leaks were rare and the internet was still going strong, but was not anything like it is now. I mean, people were still using MySpace, and Facebook was considered to be new. This was also a time when pre-ordering games and midnight releases were still a really big deal. For Gears of War 3, we had some developers from Epic come to hang out, as the studio was really close to our store. They brought in life-size replica Lancers for everyone to pose with. We had a Gears of War cake made. We had TVs set up to play Gears 2 multiplayer. It was a big in-store event at the time. And we basically treated every major release like that and did the same for RE6, minus the devs showing up, of course. Now for Resident Evil 6, I think I worked the midnight release, but I honestly can't remember. What I do remember is working the afternoon to closing shift the day of release. So just 12 hours after the midnight release, we had droves of customers coming in and returning the game. Well, trying to. It was GameStop after all, so best we could do is $20 store credit, and they took it.
Peace. Well, thank you for coming in. So, I can offer you a bag of Doritos for it.
Come on, man. Give me $1 billion and we call it a day.
Remember, I have to take all the risks. Plus, I have to repair it, polish it, lick it, rebuild it, find batteries for it, frame it, and hang it on the wall. Best I can do is a corn dog and a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, that's a deal.
One person in the comments of my last video had mentioned that the game was actually good because it sold high numbers and reviewed well. Yeah, well, the reviews are why it sold well initially, but once players got their hands on it and word of mouth got around, people started dropping their pre-orders, and those who had already bought it were trading it in for less than half of what they paid for it. And based off of what I've seen over the years, critics and players rarely align, so while I think review scores and player scores can be a good metric to gauge reception, it shouldn't be the foundation for your entire judgment of a game's performance and success. And neither should total units sold, especially when a large chunk of those units were sold at a massive discount just months after release. Which brings us to the next point, that Capcom had unreasonable sales expectations for Resident Evil 6. So at the time, Capcom reportedly expected Resident Evil 6 to sell 7 million units in essentially the first week to a month of release. While I agree this is a huge number, we need to take a look at how they got here and see if it really is unreasonable. First thing to look at would be the sales of the last two games, Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5. RE4 had sold 3 million units globally in its first 2 days as a GameCube exclusive, and it sold another 3 million units on PlayStation 2 after releasing the port. RE5 would sell 4.4 million units globally in its first month, with the game expected to hit 5 million units sold shortly thereafter. Now, with these numbers in mind and the fact that Resident Evil 6 was going to be a multi-platform release on the day of release, Capcom's 7 million units sold globally doesn't really seem all that crazy, especially when we factor in the next big consideration, which would be cost of development. So RE4 reportedly cost $10 to $15 million in development, and RE5's development was estimated to cost around $19.3 million. Resident Evil 6, however, reportedly had a development cost of $50 to $100 million and involved an over 600-person development team. It's been reported that RE6 is still to this day Capcom's biggest development investment, though some other reports are claiming Requiem will now hold that title. Now, Capcom having doubled or quadrupled the resources invested, it's reasonable for them to expect a substantial return on that substantial investment, especially given the sales history of the prior two games. So with all that in mind, Capcom's 7 million units sold goal really isn't that unreasonable, especially when you consider this was, after all, their biggest game to date, both in terms of financial investment, but also in manpower, scope, and content. To Capcom, they were taking what they thought everyone loved from Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5 and putting it all into one game, kind of like what they are doing now with Requiem, honestly. So naturally, they thought sales would double, and honestly, that's being conservative in my opinion. I think if RE6 had gotten good word of mouth and really connected with players, they could have hit 9 million units sold in just a month. But unfortunately for Capcom, that is just fiction, and they misread the situation and gave fans a Call of Duty-style Resident Evil that no one was asking for. Though it would take some time for people to get the message that RE6 was a bad Resident Evil game, the game would sell an impressive 4.5 million units in just the first few days thanks to positive critic scores, but that number would quickly plateau and RE6 would close out its first month at that same number. This would cause them to fall short of even Capcom's revised sales goal of 5 million units. And yes, that's correct. Capcom had actually reevaluated RE6 performance metrics post-launch and dropped the sales expectations by 2 million units. And considering the game had sold 4.5 million units in 2 days, getting that last push of 500,000 units by the end of the month should have been doable, but RE6 couldn't even manage to do that. And due to the poor sales and high investment cost, a few months after release, Capcom would put the game on a deep and semi-permanent discount, as I mentioned before, in an attempt to recoup losses. Unfortunately for Capcom, they still ended up reporting losses for that financial year due to the RE6 flop. So while yes, the game sold lots of units over time and reviewed well, it is still an abject failure by every measurable metric once we have all the info in front of us. And to me, nothing proves this more than what would follow, as Capcom would ice the franchise for about 5 years. If you look at Resident Evil's history, the series had seen a game of some sort release in the franchise every year since 1996, whether it was a spin-off, a new entry, or a re-release of an old entry. But after RE6 flopped, the franchise went dormant. And when Capcom came back with a new Resident Evil, it was essentially a soft reboot of the entire franchise. The number attached to the entry, while still present, wasn't part of the game's official title and was now being hidden within the logo using Roman numerals. This was done, in my opinion, as an effort to make the game more welcoming to new players while showing original fans that this is still a mainline Resident Evil game. I also think moving to Roman numerals was a little bit because of the whole 69ing draft logo debacle from RE6. If you don't know about that, I'm not going to go over it here, but feel free to look it up. This new entry in the series was even called Resident Evil Biohazard, which is the original title translation for Resident Evil, which was another way to show fans that this was intended to be a return to the older style of Resident Evil horror and design, but with a fresh new perspective, first person. So where RE6 was a globe-trotting, action and adrenaline-filled zombie-slaying romp, RE7 Biohazard was pure, isolating, in-your-face horror. And in my opinion, you don't pull a game design 180 like that if what you did before was successful and well received. While I was fact-checking and researching for this video, I started to notice something I made a brief mention of earlier, and that's that the RE6 development story mirrors a lot of what's going on currently with RE9 Requiem. Just like RE6 was trying to take everything Capcom learned from making RE4 and RE5 to create some bioweapon super game, they are doing the same thing now with Requiem. Capcom looks to be taking everything they've learned from Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 8, and the 3 remakes to finally make what is in their minds the perfect strain of Resident Evil game. One that combines the action and horror in a perfectly twisted and grotesque marriage. And once I noticed the parallels between RE6 and the upcoming RE9 Requiem, I did get a little worried for Capcom's next release. But all I had to do was just rewatch all the trailers again, and I tell you, I feel much better. From what we've seen of RE9 Requiem so far, I think Capcom isn't just taking what was successful from recent releases, but is also a representation of what they learned from their mistakes with the series over the years, especially the mistake of RE6. And it is strangely fitting that the stories of RE6 and RE9's development mirror each other so closely, and it is a topic I will definitely be exploring in the future. Now, while I like RE6 for what it is and would never say it is a bad game overall, I do think it was a bad Resident Evil game and a total failure for Capcom and the franchise. And everything I've presented here paints a pretty clear picture of that fact. But please feel free to let me know down in the comments your thoughts on Resident Evil 6 and how I'm still wrong. And while you're down there, if you would like to see me cover RE6 in a more in-depth video in the future, just let me know. Anyways, that brings us to the end of the video, so would you kindly like the video if you liked the video, dislike it if you didn't, and subscribe either way. Also remember to share this with all your RE fan friends, or with someone you need to prove wrong in a debate. Doing all that YouTube jazz helps me out tremendously and is always greatly appreciated, but regardless of any of that, thank you so much for watching until the end, and have a cool-a-rooney day.
So in conclusion, you're both equally mercurial, overly sensitive, clingy, hysterical bird brain homunculi. And I honestly can't even tell the two of you apart half the time because I don't go by height or age, I go by amount of pain in my ass, which makes you both identical. All right, everything resolved? Everybody nice and certain about their position in my world?
Yes.